I'm Marina Ormes of Astrology Heals, and I am very honored to have a special guest with me today. Moon Zlotnick is an astrologer of 50 years who is currently completing a book. She's been in the last couple of years teaching a master class in death charts at Kepler College. And just a heads up, we're going to be discussing grief today and how astrology can help with grief. So, if you're in a process and it's not the right time for you, feel free to stop and come back later at another time. It's Moon's book is a difficult but very important topic. It's called Death Charts, an astrological tool for counseling the bereaved. Thanks so much for being here with us, Moon.
I'm so happy to be here, Marina. Thank you.
Great. So, just tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book. What's your process? I know some people are familiar, but others may not be.
So, uh, in 2005, I had been practicing astrology almost 30 years, and I knew something was up because of the transits in my chart. And then my identical twin sister called me and said she had stage 4 ovarian cancer. And I kind of just knew in a cellular way that she wouldn't be around much longer. And from diagnosis to the end of her life, it was 5 months. It was very, very, very fast. And ovarian cancer is almost impossible to treat. So, especially when it was that advanced. So I had the good fortune of being with her when she died. And she had what I would call a very good death. She had completely accepted it. She'd finished up and kind of, said goodbye to everybody. And as she was dying, she kind of was having these near-death experiences of going to this beautiful place where she didn't have pain and our dead relatives were there with love. And it was quite inspiring. And then also she died, and I looked at the clock because that's what astrologers do. And I knew I would make a chart. I just didn't know what it would look like, what it would mean. And it started this next chapter of my professional life studying death charts. Although it took me 10 years to ever do a reading for anybody else, because it was just, I had so much healing to do. It was just something I wasn't ready for. So I feel like my journey to writing this book has been very organic. It wasn't something I ever wished for or hoped for, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But there was one, I looked at that chart so many times looking for answers. And then one day I looked at it and I saw the South Node was on the ascendant in the death chart. And I thought, oh, South Node, that's about completion, isn't it? That's about like the soul kind of being empty. And I thought, oh, I wasn't ready for my twin to go, but she was done.
Hmm.
And I thought about the way she went about leaving her physical body, and it was pretty clear by her actions that she was done.
Mm.
And that allowed me on a different level to just accept that that was what had to happen.
Mm.
So this all started out of my own process of recovering.
Mm. And the chart helped you with your grief and it helped you find some meaning in the
It
process.
did.
Yeah.
It did. And so then I thought maybe it could help other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So you began, and how have you found working with the bereaved? How does a death chart for the loved one that's gone, how does that help people? What does it give them?
So it helps people in so many ways. So, when you're embarking on a natal chart reading for someone or a forecast chart for someone, you have an idea before you start what you're going to talk about, but you never really know. And death charts are even more mysterious in a way, because sometimes I'll talk to somebody and let's say it's a middle-aged woman who lost her mom, and it was 3 weeks ago. And she's in a really good place psychologically and emotionally with coming to terms and making peace with it. And sometimes it will be somebody who lost a parent 20 years ago and they are completely frozen and their life is like really stuck because they can't grieve. So it demands a kind of level of I don't know if openness, but there's a kind, you have to be very willing to not know what's going to happen in the course of a reading.
Mhm.
So sometimes I think people are going to be filled with grief and they're sad, but they're not like sobbing. And other times, just based on the fact that it's so long, the person is just really, really sobbing and full of so much regret. And so there's really this huge, wide range of what happens during a reading. And one of the things that I say in my book is you must always assume that this is a vulnerable person who's coming to talk to you about this loss. Because even if they've healed,
Yeah.
you never, I believe that you can make your peace with the loss, but you never get over it,
Mhm.
like how
Right.
people tell you, well, just get over it. No, doesn't happen.
It's
So,
it's a new it's a new stage for the bereaved person, right? I mean, it's about figuring out who you are now with things being
yeah.
different. And but you also mentioned something about your twin, and you felt like the death chart was described not only her departure, but the being she became as she left the physical plane. So how is a death chart, in a sense, um, also giving us insight into the next phase
Yes.
for the dead person?
So I haven't explored this with my clients.
Yeah.
So this is very, very personal.
Hmm.
So in the death chart of my twin, the sun and Saturn were both at 0 degrees of Leo, opposing Chiron at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And uh, one of the things about ovarian cancer and chemotherapy, and anyway, so my sister had so much trouble eating because of the disease and the treatment. And the sun Saturn, I mean, she was emaciated.
Hmm.
She was bare bones. I think about Saturn, right?
Hmm.
But in the process of her dying, she really was this wounded healer archetype because she wasn't afraid of death. And she would tell everybody, there was a care team, and she would tell everybody, I'm going to this beautiful place and I don't have any pain and I'm surrounded by beautiful music and my relatives are there and all I feel is love when I see them and they're full of love and you're kind of like, wow, that's what happens when you die. You're like in this wonderful place because there's so much unknown, there's so much uncertainty. And of course, I trusted her because I know her my whole life, right? Like she wouldn't make this up. And you could feel it in her environment that she was like so at peace, that there was nothing. It was just like everybody that was part of this was so elevated. It was just a really extraordinary
Hmm.
environment. And I thought, well, she's channeling Chiron.
Right.
So, so
Right.
I don't know how that's true for other people. And there were other things, but that was like just this very key thing that I thought, wow,
Yeah.
she really embodied those archetypes at the end of her life.
Well, and I suppose we can't know, obviously. I mean, there's no way to concretely know, but in the sense that it can give a sense of meaning to the bereaved person, or I don't know if
Yes.
you ever have people, but um that that death chart, and my understanding from your book is that it really is giving that sense of the bigger picture of meaning and helping to put the whole experience into a
Yes,
context.
right. And I think because there's no way of knowing what happens when somebody dies and even maybe what happens afterwards, that people have so much both confusion, sometimes regret. I don't think I've really done any readings where people didn't have guilt or regret. And so there's a lot of this, I feel like, suffering that people have that sometimes can be, it can be put off to the side through a death chart reading. So I have an example from last week, which
Mm.
I think is a really, really kind of unique way that this works, and it doesn't always work this way, right? But so this was a mom who in her in my setup for readings on the webpage, people can write in what it is that is motivating their reading. And she said, my daughter died 15 years ago, and I wake up every morning thinking I have to tell her something, and then I have to realize every day that she's still dead. And when I read that, I thought, this is somebody who has a lot of unresolved grief.
Mhm.
So, I get the date, time, and the place, and you put it in your computer like it's a natal chart because there is no computer program for a death chart. But, it comes up with all of the symbols we know and all of the aspects we know. And this particular death chart had a stellium in Capricorn in the 12th house. And the moon was conjunct Pluto, which was conjunct the north node, all within 1 degree. And then the sun was conjunct the north node and Pluto, and the moon within 2 degrees. And so the sun is the physical body, the moon is the emotional body, Pluto is a symbol for death, and the north node is the symbol for the evolution of the soul. And the 12th house is a little bit in an altered reality in kind of an in between space. Anyway, so I looked at that chart. I thought she was on board with dying. I could tell that. And then by the first house, very close to the first house, ascendant, there was a Chiron Neptune conjunction. And I thought, well, the illness must have been confusing. That must have been hard to diagnose. The first house is often the conditions around the death. Okay, the ascendant is a lot about kind of the point of departure. So I went into the reading with those 2 points of clarity to talk to the mom. And so everything is always a little bit different. But, she said, can you tell me anything about what was happening when my daughter died? So I talked about the triple conjunction and this readiness for death. And when I said that, the tears just came. And she went on to tell me the story about her daughter who started having health problems in her late 30s. And the doctors just kept putting her on different antidepressants and telling her to lose weight, and nobody really investigated. So by the time she was 43, she was disabled. She couldn't work, and she'd been to dozens of doctors. So she moved in with her mom, and she had this emergency in the middle of the night, and they went to the ER, and they discovered that she had a rare heart condition, and her lungs were full of blood clots. So they did this emergency surgery, which failed. They put her on life support. And 3 days later, the doctor said she'll never recover and said to the mom, you have to decide to end her life. So her mom did that, which is unimaginable. And she felt guilty for the last 15 years, every day that she was responsible. So she said to me, no, I've been going to therapy groups. I've been going to bereavement groups. And nobody has ever said to me that my daughter was ready to die. Thank you so much.
Mm.
And then I said, was it confusing? Was it a confusing illness? So we went down that path.
Yeah.
So she felt affirmed in this way. This is what I feel so strongly about, is that we have this system of symbols. We use it as astrologers for everything. And now we can't say with 100% certainty, but the more I do this, I realize there is a picture of what's happening when somebody passes. And sometimes knowing that can change that grief trajectory for a person who's suffering, just like it did for me, you know?
Incredible. Hmm.
So, I mean, she wrote me an email the next day. She's just like, I'm still in awe of the fact that how much better I feel just from hearing what you had to say. So,
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
Amazing. And in the book, you kind of walk people. So for an astrologer reading the book, they're going to learn some of these techniques. And I
Mhm.
think, as an astrologer myself, I think this would be something that would take a lot of study and sitting with and practicing to really feel comfortable with using. Um, but I think your book is really relevant also for anyone who is looking for some meaning in the grief process, because you also talk just about grief as a process and the different ways that we lose
Mhm.
people. And it's there's just a whole gamut of the kinds of things we might take on, or the kinds of things that you're saying that might be regrets or um, unresolved. So,
So I feel like the book is kind of part textbook,
mhm,
but before I could really talk about the astrology, it just feels like it's such a let's call it it's a very intimate space, and um it's a very difficult space to walk into with people. And so giving the astrologer preparation in terms of understanding
mhm,
grief and different kinds of grief and recovery and coping mechanisms and like all of these things that you need to recognize. So I'm going to tell you another story because
mm,
anger is sometimes an indication of unresolved grief. So I had a client who I saw was the first anniversary of her mother's death when she signed up for a death chart reading. And I was doing the prep and I thought, I need to know her mother's birthday. I just like, which I don't talk about much in the book, but sometimes you have to look at the birth chart of the person who died because there's so much that you can know. So I emailed her, can you tell me? And we were meeting at 3 in the afternoon. This was like 10 in the morning. So I got a really angry email back. What are you doing asking for this now? How do I know you have enough time to prepare? I don't know if I really want to go through this. But
mhm,
so I called her up.
mhm,
We had a long conversation, and I just realized that she's having, I think, what everybody has on the first anniversary, which is that you just get so dysregulated.
mhm,
So I reassured her that I had enough time and that, I was really well prepared. I just like had a little bit I wanted to add. And we had an incredibly good session. And I was talking to an astrology friend of mine
mhm.
who was like, God, if I didn't know that about grief and I got an angry email, I would just write that person off,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so we don't, as practitioners, we don't want to make anything worse for anybody. So it's our job to be responsible, and people sometimes will lash out, but it's not about you. They're mad
Right.
that they lost their parent.
Right.
So,
Right. And to have that neutrality and that professionalism
yeah.
to be able to hold space and trust
Yeah.
the process, really.
And honestly, Marina, if I hadn't been doing this for all these years,
Hmm.
I mean, I feel like now at this point, I'm really ready for this kind of work
Yeah.
because I've been, consulting for so long. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
And you've been through your own process, and
yes,
you can relate to
yes, I can
the
relate.
feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And um just to shift gears a little bit, so you talk about eclipses, and it's really fascinating how you bring the eclipse in and how that impacts. Can you just say a little bit about how you use eclipses, how you think about them in the death chart?
So I think about eclipses, and this is now based on, I started studying them in 1980, so a lot of years of observation. So eclipses, when they are especially deeply aligned with the birth chart of the person going through the loss, they will always bring some kind of soul evolutionary event. So, I've learned like over many, many years that you can work with a Saturn transit. So if you're having a Saturn transit, you need to work really hard and you need to know your limits and you need to take responsibility. And there are all these things, even with Neptune transits, Pluto transits, where you can collaborate with that energy and you can be part of the process. Eclipses, totally things that happen to you that come with my understanding that this is the intent of you must live through this in order to align with your soul's purpose. And I can say that astrologically because the eclipses are only when the sun and the moon and the nodes are aligned. So we have that symbolism already from the nodal axis, and we have it being illuminated. We have a heavenly body, it's illuminated, it's cast in shadow, it's illuminated again. There's the symbolism of things that have been hidden coming into view. So even before I was studying death charts, I mean, I remember many years ago, a client had an eclipse on Uranus in the third house, and her brother died in a freak skiing accident. I mean,
Mm.
there was no way anybody could predict anything like that, right? And so, and this is primarily solar eclipses. Lunar eclipses sometimes will be part of the narrative, but I feel like the event is related to the solar eclipse. And I'm just going to say a few things about eclipses. So eclipses always happen on a date in the calendar, but that's not when they happen in real life. So they seem to have, and everybody who studies eclipses has a different opinion about this, right? So 3 to 6 months in advance, 3 to 6 months afterwards. So so they can be triggering, and we're not even looking for it because, oh, that eclipse is in 2027, right?
Mhm.
But when you study them, so let's say the eclipse is at 27 degrees Aries, and 6 months earlier, Mars is at 27 degrees Aries. And then a few weeks later, maybe Saturn is at 27 degrees Aries. And then maybe 6 or 8 weeks later, Mars is retrograded and it's gone back. And these are all activating part of this story of what's happening around this eclipse event. And I use this example in the book of a client of mine who had an eclipse, and I think it was actually she had a Venus Saturn conjunction at 27 Capricorn, and I think it was the 27-degree Aries eclipse. And when it hit the first square, uh, her brother died by suicide, and her mom was in the hospital. Her dad died when she was young. She had an older brother that had been in a car accident she was taking care of. And she was the only one in the family that could deal with her brother's uh, estate and also with the funeral. And it turned out that he had terrible financial problems. And the following eclipse in Libra, I can't remember exactly the degree, which squared her Venus Saturn again, she was in the thick of dealing with all of this financial debt that he had accrued. And so you see people under eclipses in these circumstances where they're so thrown
Mm.
out of their
Mm.
capacity to be in control of life.
It's kind of a way of looking for or at the triggering events. Is
Yeah.
that accurate? Yeah. Yeah.
And eclipses are really good. I always talk about them when I'm doing forecasts, but not delineating them specifically because they're always like a curveball. They're always like the wild card. They're
Mm.
not. In retrospect, they make perfect sense, but
Uh-huh.
kind of almost
Yeah.
impossible to predict in
Yeah.
advance.
But sometimes and just coming back to it being a tool for the bereaved, sometimes just knowing that truth and that it was out of your control can be kind of freeing, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And does that help people to access the forgiveness or the acceptance?
What I see a lot is that movement towards acceptance, and it takes the onus off the person. You know, yeah, that's a very profound impact. And
Mm-hmm.
people will often, come back a year later and, I'll hear a lot about how it was really progressive for them in terms of being able to move forward with their recovery process.
Beautiful. Yeah, and one of the things that struck me in your book is how you talk about, some deaths are really peaceful and even maybe could be considered beautiful, and other deaths are really sudden, traumatic, tragic.
Mhm.
So the death chart can give insight into the circumstances or the conditions, or how would you describe that?
Very often it will be like a representation of what the person finds out kind of after the fact.
Mm,
So, um, and again, I would never have anybody use this in a predictive sense, but like car crashes or sudden heart attacks will be very Uranian with some Mars thrown in.
mhm,
People who are sick for a very, very long time will have very long, big Chiron or Saturn aspects. Uh, People with very hard to diagnose, confusing, like way out of the box illnesses will have a lot of Neptune. Or there's an example in the book with a real big Neptune death chart. And the wife found out that her husband had been having an affair after he died because she had to go into his computer and
mm,
she found all these texts. So the planets still act like the planets
mm,
in death charts,
mhm,
you know, but they create a narrative just like a birth chart creates a narrative, but it's about a departure
mm,
as opposed to
mhm.
an entrance.
Yeah. And I don't know, do you see it? Like, to me, I think this is something that we probably on some level know or feel or sense. And then having, just like for a birth chart, astrology gives you that language for what you feel on some level, but you don't have the words for.
And it's also been sometimes it's just so literal.
Hmm.
So I think what you said, absolutely. And people will say, and actually somebody once said to me, yeah, that's really described like my experience at my mom's bedside.
Mm,
But I had an example of a husband whose wife had a traumatic brain injury, and basically because of the injury to her brain, she alienated everybody in her life. So
mm,
she didn't have her kids wouldn't see her, her friends wouldn't see her, and he stuck by her. He took care of her, and he had to retire early to take care of her. And in the death chart, Juno, which I think of as the symbol for the spouse, it
mm,
was on the ascendant. And then all of the other 10 planets were on the other side of the chart,
mm,
having to do with being apart or separate or other people. The first thing I said to him was, oh, you were all alone, weren't you? In taking care of your wife, which he had been for 10 years, all by
mm,
himself. And I
mm,
mean, just
mm,
that we're so aligned with the universe. That's what it keeps saying to me, is that even in these endpoints, we're still aligned with the universe. We're
mm,
still part of this cosmos. And then as a single person, you can't feel like, oh, I did all these things wrong. Because no, this was part of this universal pattern.
mm. Yeah.
And then the other thing I'm going to say, I don't want to go into it too much, but very often there will be what I think of as an intimation in somebody's birth chart. So I had a client with a Mars-Venus conjunction square Uranus. And, most astrologers would look at that and they would say, well, there's some unpredictability, at least, in terms of romantic relationships. And I can't remember, I think it was an eclipse. When the eclipse activated that, her husband was killed instantly in a car
Mm.
accident.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so to
Yeah.
me, that's just another level of, we're in synchronicity with the universe because here's this intimation in the birth chart
Right.
that, oh, you could have some kind of unexpected, unpredictable event in a love relationship.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
then here comes this eclipse, which I think is destiny. And then this event happens.
That I'm glad you said that. I mean, that really lines up with how I view astrology too, is that it's the events are expressions of the underlying pattern that's already there.
Yes.
And and Uranus has to do with among other things, it can have to do with shock. And
Mhm.
so it plays a role in our human experience. And the more we can understand, to me, these archetypes and how they operate, the more we can
Mhm.
see that it's not our fault, or
Mhm.
how we can work with it in a positive way.
Right. We can
Yeah,
befriend Saturn instead of feeling like, oh my God, I'm in for it because I'm having a Saturn transit.
totally. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And just to pull out again something that you've mentioned, but I think it's worth saying specifically, is that you do not use, and you don't see, at least you say this in the book, that you cannot use the chart to predict death. So
Correct.
this is not predictive. So the death
Yes.
chart is for after the fact, to
Yes.
put things in
Exactly.
context. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'll tell you a really interesting story because you know how when you spend a lot of time learning and studying something, then you start seeing it everywhere, you know.
Mhm.
So I was doing prep for this reading, and this fellow who he was maybe 62, 64. And I mean, he had progressed Pluto, he had solar arc Pluto, he had Pluto transits. I was just like, oh no. So, of course, I'm not going to say anything, but I'm thinking, so, we're doing the forecast. And I said, now, is anything transformational going on in your life?
Mhm.
And he was like, yeah. My folks were in a concentration camp, and I just found the therapist who could help me get over the trauma of
Wow.
growing up with them. And I was like,
Mhm.
that is so Plutonian. I was really relieved. And
Yeah.
it was absolutely affirming that as astrologers, we have a clue
Yeah.
of what things can bring, but in reality, you don't know.
We don't
You
know
don't
what it
know.
will look like.
Yeah.
And to pretend that we do is going to get ourselves in trouble.
Yes.
I think.
Right. I
So,
totally agree.
um, yeah. Wow. Uh, and okay, so is there anything else you want people to know? We'll share how they can order the book and all that. But before we get to that, just anything else you feel it's important.
Well, so I would like people to know that my fervent hope and wish is that this book will open up a new field of astrology and that many, many, many multiples of astrologers will start studying bereavement and grief charts and death charts so that we can use this amazing tool to
Mm,
help people who are really suffering because they lost someone they loved. And that with grief counseling and all the other things that are now accessible as ways for people to get help, that
mm,
astrology can move into that position
mm.
and,
Yeah,
in the world,
it's beautiful.
right?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
really is beautiful. And
yeah.
our I mean, this is me and my philosophy, but thinking about our bigger cultural issues and patterns, and our inability, I think, to talk about death is
Yes.
part of the problem.
Yes.
And because we can't process what we can't talk about. And when we
Right.
don't
And
process
you
it,
can't
it
heal,
yeah,
right?
you can't
Yeah.
heal and it
Yeah.
shows up in other ways. And
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And people, I mean, people have physical problems because of unresolved grief,
Yeah.
psychological problems. I mean, I have had people who have said, I'm, I've been completely stuck since my brother died. Like, just,
Yeah.
and that's, to me, it's pretty clear it's unresolved grief. So if we have more tools, and this
Mhm.
is, I think, a very reliable tool,
Mhm.
let's get it out there and have people use them. And I've worked with a few people who are Hellenistic astrologers, and it still works in their system.
Yeah.
So, I'm using it as a modern astrologer, but
Mhm.
I think that you can really use, I don't know about Vedic, but you certainly can use Hellenistic astrology and it will still work.
Super interesting.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, so I have two questions. How can people order the book? I know as we record this, the book is just about to come out, but people could be watching this after it's out. So, from
Right.
that perspective, and then also, how can people book a death chart
Yes.
reading with you?
Okay. So you can find me at astrologybymoonrabbit.com. And I have a landing page for the book on my website. It's not up yet, but it will be. And you can go there and order the book. Okay.
Mhm.
So I say this unfortunately because I'm not a fan of Amazon, but it will be available on Amazon Books. But please, people, spend your money at bookshop.org
Beautiful. Yeah,
because
and
we're in so much trouble right now because we have these, yeah, we don't have to get political, but I have
absolutely.
strong feelings.
Yeah, bookshop.org is a great
Yes,
option. Yeah.
bookshop.org. Great.
Yeah. And so the title of the book again is Death Charts, an astrological tool for counseling the bereaved, and Astrology by moonrabbit.com.
Come.
Okay, I got it. All right. And we will put that link in the description for this video, so you should be able to find that below. And any final closing words?
No, I'm
No.
good. Thanks so much,
Oh,
Marina.
thank you so much for being here, Moon. Just it's such an honor to be with you and talk with you, and I am just so happy about the work you're doing. Not happy about the circumstances, but I think it's really powerful healing tool. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us.